A Car, a Corpse, and a Candy Store This Side of Eden by Gwen Taylor. Copyright 2025 by Gwen Taylor, all rights reserved. No part of this audio may be used without express written consent. Published by a Hard Row Press as part of the Weird Eden series. Chapter 1. No one was going to believe that I'd just accidentally stolen a car. And a corpse. But I had. In the dim streetlights of the frozen grocery store parking lot, I'd veered my wonky-wheeled buggy through the slush and muck right up to what I fully believed was my car. It even had my sleeping boyfriend in the passenger side, his face squashed up against the glass, hoodie pulled low, dozing and drooling while I did the hard work of lugging the week's groceries into the trunk, like normal. The hatch opened easily, and I shoved the bags into the back in a haphazard way that would make my mother cringe and criticize for a good hour. But as she was tucked safely back in Asheville after her visit, I was once more free to toss things in like a garbage collector in my hurry to get out of the falling snow and into the car's heat. I consoled myself that I'd be warm soon, driving back home and sipping that dark roast that waited for me, if Chad hadn't drunk it all while I shopped. He was good like that. A human garbage disposal, Mom had called him. She had a thing with garbage analogies, and with dissing Chad. But the man had charming qualities that kept me from kicking his chiseled ass to the curb. Mainly it was that chiseled ass, but his generosity helped. Actually, he had a heart of gold. The man might not strike a lick at real work, but as a rich trust fund kid, he tossed money at me like there was plenty where that came from. A concept so foreign to me that I still hoarded most of what he gave me, choosing not to buy the jewelry he told me to get myself in favor of food and electricity. Case in point, I'd just paid for the groceries with a fraction of what he'd palmed to me for Valentine's Day. I felt guilty keeping his gifts, but when my naughty little conscience would rear its head and offer him all he'd given me back, he'd wave me off and say, "No take-backs," like a gleeful kid. Childish, yes, but sweeter than clover honey. He had his good qualities for sure, and I did love him, even if our life together lacked a little something. Still, I loved Chad. Yes. That's why I was even out in this mess, schlepping across the tundra of a parking lot in the night and ruining the bottoms of my favorite jeans to procure my Valentine's Day gift to him, the makings of a delicious fried chicken dinner and a delicious me after. Believe it or not, food was all he ever asked for as gifts. That, and fun times on Gran's old Irish chain quilt. But I made the effort to cook like there was no tomorrow, pulling out all the tricks I knew, or, as my southern gran would say, I put on the dog for him. He'd grown up on haute cuisine and solitary meals in a big mansion, but once he'd tasted good, down-home southern cooking, his palate had sat up like a fine-nosed hound and howled for more. And I was happy to give it to him. Sitting around the cramped kitchen of my gran's one-room cabin with him slurping down my cooking like there was no tomorrow made me feel useful. Like I had a purpose outside of the day job I hated and the side job I did just to get by. A purpose beyond doing what my mother wanted me to do. Chad gave me that purpose. Chad gave me someone to love on. Chad gave me life in Eden, and when I thought he was dead, well, I'd become the hound sitting up and howling out my grief, my heart beating out of my chest and scurrying for the clutter of my back seat. Only it wasn't my back seat, and it wasn't my pink off-brand Stanley in the cup holder. And it wasn't my Chad, thank God, who was the poor corpse slumped against the cold window pane with 2 small holes in his forehead. But it was my scream filling up this SUV that was creeping down the one-lane road toward home, my hands frozen at 10 and 2, and my mind racing for a solution. What could I possibly do, and how had I driven this far without noticing I was in the wrong car? For one freaking keyless entry was to blame. I didn't have to hunt for keys, only trust in the FOB. See where that got me. Mom had been right about one thing. Technology was going to kill us. Got me into an unlocked car that wasn't mine with a corpse, also not mine. For 2, my mind had been on other things, on if this Valentine's Day would be special or if I even wanted it to be special. Would Chad propose? So, I'd driven on autopilot. In what amounted to a hearse, I stared into the snowy dark. There was no pulling over now unless I wanted to spend the night on the shit-slick road with a dead man. I had to get to the nearest house and call for help from a landline, since my cell was useless in the mountains. Or make it to the general store. It, at least, was right off the road. My lungs finally wore out and I gripped the steering wheel, panting. It's going to be okay. You'll figure this out, Vada, I lied to myself. It had to be okay. If I could just get to the general store, I could get help. And that's all I had to do. Make it a few miles to help. I could do that. If I could stay on the road, all I needed was to keep my eye on the prize. Oh God, oh God, oh God. I repeated the unformed prayer like a mantra and kept a steady pressure on the gas. This was fine. It was going to be fine. Get to the store. Get help. Get out of this mess. My brain couldn't process anything else. I heard a rustling and glanced over at the dead man in the passenger seat. No, it couldn't be. He was dead. I'd moved his arm myself when I had still thought it was Chad. I'd seen that white face. Those 2 holes. I'd almost died sliding off the road when I'd seen him. He was dead. 2 bullets to the head dead. Gonzo. There was no coming back from that. Was there? Number. Oh Lord, were ghosts real? Number. I knew better than that. A God-fearing Southerner doesn't believe in ghosts. And I was raised by Gran to be just that. But to also kind of believe in some wild mountain tales she'd imparted, like the walking not-so-dead. But no, the dead don't really rise, right? Right, no question. Still, I listened for more rustling with my heart beating like it was applying for a job in roadwork. The sound, like 2 80s windbreakers fighting for polyester dominance, came again, and I gripped the wheel, knowing if I dared react to some ghost, I'd soon join them by dying in a frozen ditch. I choked on a whisper against the evil of the walking dead. Get behind me, Satan! From the back seat, a groan woke the hairs on my head, and on my arms, and on the legs I hadn't shaved for Valentine's Day. A wavering voice rose from the dark. Daddy? Chapter 2. I hit the brakes and the corpse hit the dashboard, and the SUV fishtailed around the aptly named Dead Man's Curve like a minnow in a trap line. Despite years of driving in whiteouts and on ice block roads, I overcorrected and sent us spinning. Me, the corpse, and the voice in the dark. It was like I'd become trapped in a life-sized snow globe. The snow was the only thing that hadn't changed. It was hitting us from all directions, white, pristine, silent, unbothered by the life and death in its wake. Meanwhile, inside the stolen snow globe, all I could do was scream as the dead guy swayed left to right, coming across the drive shaft and slapping a heavy hand on my leg before getting folded up at a bad angle between the dashboard and the floor. My life should have flashed before my eyes. Maybe it would have given a few more perilous seconds, but the car came to a sudden crunching stop, and the corpse sank into an even deeper bend and thudded its head onto the passenger door frame. It was a meat-sick sound that had my coffee bubbling up my throat and threatening a second pour. I tried to breathe through my nose and keep the dark roast down. I finally thought to check in the back seat and dared to look in the rearview mirror. The apparition who'd called for Daddy was flesh and blood and very much alive. Oh God, where's my daddy? I locked eyes with the sleepy kid who was still strapped in securely with a seatbelt across her chest, sitting up with a blanket falling from her puffy pink parka. Ironically, we asked the same fearful question in crackling unison. Who are you? Me? Because I didn't want to tell her the truth about the dead man in the stolen car's floorboard. And her because she'd woken up in a nightmare. Well, I was in that category too, living a nightmare, but I could only imagine how a kid would take this reality. I swallowed down that second pour that was souring in my throat and rasped out a reply. I'm Vada. Vada Andrews. Who are you, sweetheart? The girl couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, but she studied me with the world-weary eyes of a much older soul. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. But you can call me Bean. My dad calls me Bean. Where is he? I gave the corpse a side-eye and scrambled for something to say. The clever girl unbuckled herself and rose up to look over the back of the passenger seat. No! I lunged up but was snagged and snapped back by my own seatbelt. Shit! Don't look, Bean! But it was too late. The girl's eyes went round, but she sat calmly back down and rebuckled her belt. That's not him. My voice squeaked out. It's not? Bean shook her head. No, my daddy is skinny and redheaded like me. A sudden fear that I had indeed somehow died en route to the grocery store and had just hallucinated the last 2 hours hit me in the part of my brain still processing my fear and adrenaline. Was I dying in a ditch somewhere, having this weird, macabre nightmare in the final death rattles of my cerebral cortex? I turned to the steering wheel and gripped it like a proverbial lifeline. Then I pinched myself and tried to hold on to the hope that because that hurt, I was indeed alive and experiencing this nightmare in reality. Small comfort, but comfort it was, considering. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Okay, Bean. We are going to try to get back moving and head to the general store up ahead where we can call your daddy. Okay? You know his number? Behind me, Bean nodded. I could feel the vehicle shake with the movement. I gave the gas a tentative tap and was rewarded with spinning wheels. Back up and then go forward, Bean said, leaning close enough to my seat that I could smell chocolate on her breath. That's a good idea. But you sit back, okay? I saw her reach out for the oh shit handle and grip it. When I was certain she'd gotten a good grip, I put the car in reverse, slid back a few revolutions, and then headed forward. Spinning, spinning. And then, traction. My stolen hearse eased forward on the road again, and I breathed a sigh of relief that was short-lived. The whoop-whoop of a siren and the telltale red and blue strobes filling up the spaces between the snowflakes lit up the night behind me. I let off the gas and coasted to a roll and finally tapped the brakes to a stop. The cop cars creeping toward me did the same, and then I realized my purse was in my real car, with my license. I hadn't needed it with my fistful of hoarded Chad cash. Why hadn't I just taken it into the store? I groaned and banged my head onto the steering wheel with a thud that reminded me of the one the corpse had made earlier. I glanced at Bean, who was composing herself and folding her hands into her lap. She smiled at me, and that did nothing but make me feel irrationally like there was something sinister behind that. But that was crazy. This whole night was crazy. And now I had to explain to the police just how I happened to be behind the wheel driving Miss Crazy into the whiteout of a cold Valentine's night. I consoled myself with a murmured hope. This couldn't possibly be worse. Chapter 3. It could. Is there much worse than being handcuffed by an ex-boyfriend from high school? In a going-to-jail way, I mean? I submit that there is not. Unless you count being suspected of kidnapping and murder and grand theft auto. Lord, how did this night snowball out of control? I snorted at the irony of my cliché. I was sitting inside the general store, cuffed by the aforementioned ex, Greg, to one of the lattice-bottomed rocking chairs where the old men smokers usually sat playing checkers on the pickle barrel. It was still set up with the promise of a new game between me and Bean. She sat primly in the other rocker to my right, red hair tucked under her toboggan, serenely kicking her legs back and forth and rocking on the creaking floor like we both didn't just arrive with a corpse. Bean? She turned her pixie face up to me and smiled, and I saw she had chocolate on her teeth. I like this place. They have a lot of candy. Oh, right. I glanced around at all the old-fashioned candies on display in wicker baskets lined with red checkered cloth. There was a lot of candy. That was the whole draw of our little town of Eden. Time had stopped here in some nebulous era between the 50s and 80s, or had simply taken the best parts of each decade and sewn them together into a folksy general store where I got bread and milk and gas and misogyny with my nostalgia. I usually never left the Eden General Store without a pack of tea-berry gum and a whole bag of lemon drops. But something told me it would be a long time before I got any lemon drops again. Especially if this went more sideways than it already had. I had to do something. Bean, look at me. Did you know that man in the front seat? She pulled her green gaze from the baskets of candies and fixed it on me. No. He was a bad man. How do you know that? Bean squinched up her nose. Daddy said he was. He was a bad man. Daddy's a good man. Which one do you like best? Which one? I guess I prefer good, meh? I think I'd like those. She pointed to the maple nut goodies. And the chocolate drops. She stared at me, waiting for me to chime in. I nodded my head towards the lemon drops. Those are my favorites. Bean smiled, and this smile at least didn't make me feel like I was babysitting Chucky's little sister. Daddy will get us some. He always brings me candy. Nix that. I definitely was getting Kid's sister, Chucky Edition vibes coming off Bean. I tried again. Hey, Bean? She gave me half her attention as she studied the candy baskets. There's so much. Like Christmas. I felt a pang of empathy. Maybe I was reacting badly. Maybe Bean was just a normal little girl in a traumatic situation. What does your daddy do? He takes care of the bad men. A chill slid up my spine and branched out in icy veins to my neck and shoulders. Like, for a living? Bean shrugged and went back to assessing the candy. I needed to talk to the police. I wondered if Greg would hear me out. Surely, he didn't really think I'd stolen a car, a kid, and a corpse on purpose. God, when I put it like that, I sounded like a deranged killer. Something I was starting to think Bean's father was. I had no idea how to ask her if he killed the dead guy now sandwiched in the floorboard of the stolen SUV. Bean left off her candy counting and bent toward me suddenly, putting a hand to the right side of her mouth in a sort of stage whisper. Daddy's going to teach me. Then she hopped down from the rocker and went to stand in front of the chocolate drops, bending to sniff but not taking any. At least she was well-behaved. I shook my head. Well-behaved psychopath, maybe, I wasn't sure. At the front, Greg finished his litany of phone calls on the ancient rotary phone that the owner had kept behind the counter for as long as I'd been alive. And probably longer. I called out to him. Come here. Greg's gaze snagged on mine, and he came over slowly, like he was dreading talking to me again. Given the circumstances, I couldn't blame him. Greg, listen to me. I'm listening, Vada. I just don't like what I'm hearing. Shut up, would you? I'm sorry. It's just, I'm telling you the truth. You know me. He shifted, letting his gaze slip from me to Bean combing over the store with her prim hands behind her back. How do you know this kid? I don't. Well, just calm down now. The salt trucks will be through soon, and then we can head down to the station. Figure this out. If all is as you said, then it is as I said, damn it. Why would I be in a car that looks just like mine with a dead man and some random kid? He shrugged like there could be many reasons, like he'd heard them all on the beat as a country cop in Eden where the worst crime we'd had was a rash of break-ins perpetrated by a family of raccoons. If my hands hadn't been cuffed, I'd have been tempted to punch Greg in one of his obnoxious shoulders that he kept shrugging. Did you call Bean's dad? He glanced at me sideways, like he was unsure if he should tell me. Finally, he shrugged again. Yeah, we got him coming in Ted's cruiser behind the salt. Good. He can confirm what I've told you. I got a hold of that dandy man of yours. Chad. Right. He's driving your car up. We need to check his story. What story? I got into the wrong car. Check the back. My groceries are ruined back there. You just sit tight, Vada. I'm on top of things. Greg patted my knee and stuck his thumbs through his belt loops and sidled off like we were just shooting the breeze at the diner. I slumped into the rocking chair, and the nightmare wasn't ending anytime soon, but at least someone was coming to my rescue. Although I couldn't see Chad being of much use in this situation, I wasn't 100% sure what he did all day while I was at work at Mrs. Pete's diner, but I assumed the video games he always had plugged in weren't going to help him deal with the absurdity of this nightmare. As these cops weren't in Daisy Dukes with flotation device boobs asking him to spread 'em. Then again, at least he'd understand the charge of grand theft auto. Chapter 4. Bean and I sat in uncomfortable silence, though on her part she didn't seem to be disturbed. I, however, was getting a crick in my neck from the odd angle of having my hands behind my back. Bean watched me roll my head and scrunch up my shoulders for some relief. Do your arms hurt like that? She imitated me, holding hers behind her back and rolling her neck like I had. I don't like it. I nodded, not wanting to talk, and closed my eyes to try some yoga stretches. I'd just popped a vertebrae when my arms suddenly had slack, and then the metal cuffs were being pulled back. I turned, expecting Greg, but Bean lifted the cuffs away and set them in my lap. I finally understood the expression about having one's jaw hit the floor. Mine stayed there even as I rubbed my wrists and blinked at the metal sitting heavy and cold in my lap. How the ... I turned to Bean. She had moved on like she hadn't just performed some kind of criminal magic to unlock my restraints. I examined the cuffs, picking them up and looking closely at them in the light. How had she done that? My dad says these things are worthless. She was watching me again. I hurried to hide them in my coat pocket, glad to be free of Greg's heavy cuffs, but also half afraid I'd been set free to jump from the frying pan into the fire. Greg wouldn't like seeing me free. He'd be the one jumping then, to all the wrong conclusions, like me being some mastermind criminal. Would he even believe the kid sitting beside me swinging her heels in the rocker had freed me? Maybe I should put them back on. Logic said I should, just to keep Greg from going ballistic. But still, I didn't move to try to put myself back in shackles. Instead, I questioned Bean. What else does your daddy say? Down with the man, maybe? Live free or die hard? I had no idea what criminal masterminds did say. He says in this world, you have to take care of number one. That tracked, a criminal out for what he could get. Maybe the dead guy had gotten in the way of Daddy Bean getting what he wanted. I'm number one, Bean said without a hint of irony. Of course you are. Of course she was. Number one psycho kid. Number one on my nightmare list. Number one in the heart of Papa Bean, criminal mastermind. You know what else Daddy says? I shook my head, dying to know. Bean stayed silent, gaze glued to mine until I finally said, What? She made a performance out of smoothing her parka and folding her hands in her lap. Daddy says that the eyes don't lie. He's teaching me. She lifted her blank gaze from her lap to meet my eyes. Yours are good. I like your eyes. Hopefully she liked them to stay in my head. I swallowed back a gurgle of acid and any more questions that might have tripped off my now dry tongue and sat back. Outside, the red and blue strobes were still freeze-framing the snowflakes in a macabre disco. Greg, his deputy, and the jump-suited man with the wrecker service stood in front of the open passenger door to the stolen SUV, probably thinking I'd mangled a corpse into the floorboard. I sure dreaded the diner tomorrow, and if there was a tomorrow, I might as well skip town. There would be no living this down. Then again, come tomorrow, maybe I'd be in maximum security sharing a cell with a 300-pound linebacker named Mabel, learning the fine art of toilet wine. A cold touch had me jumping. Bean didn't seem fazed by my reaction to her pale hand on mine. Sorry, you scared me. What's wrong? She waited for me to settle before pointing into the shadows at the back of the store. Daddy's here. Chapter 5. Daddy was a 6'4" spot with dark red hair that could have passed for brown and a chisel on his ass that rivaled Chad's. He looked like he'd stepped out of a John Wayne movie, all swagger and badge and a fresh cut running jagged down his cheek. I half expected him to have spurs on his expensive boots, but they were unadorned, unlike his navy windbreaker, which sported a shiny star. Marshall. I dropped my handcuffs. They clanked to the floor, where my jaw had found itself once more. Bean picked up the cuffs and placed them in my lap again before raising up her arms to Daddy Bean. He picked her up with a smile and one eye on me. How's my girl? Can we have some candy, please? I was good. Vada can tell you I was. Bean and Daddy Bean both looked at me, waiting. I shook myself out of my silence. Yes, she's been very good. Vada. The marshal seemed to be trying out my name. He jostled Bean on his hip and then pressed his forehead to hers. Bean baby, you go tell the nice policeman how Miss Vada accidentally rescued you from the kidnappers. He set her down and she smoothed her parka once more. 2 bad guys. She turned towards the candy, her gaze roaming over the baskets as she absently added, 1 got away. Yes, that's a good girl. I watched Bean head towards the open door at the front of the store, wondering if she were going to skip out, but she walked like a little soldier, steel rod spine, prim hands, angelic pixie face ready for confession. I turned to Daddy Bean, wanting to ask so many questions, starting with what had gone down in the grocery parking lot. Had Bean been kidnapped? But when I turned, he was gone, and I was once more cuffed to the rocking chair. I slumped down. It was just as well. There was nowhere to go. I looked out at Bean talking to Greg. And then, in what felt like only seconds, she was bringing him back with her, with Daddy Bean bringing up the rear, his eyes accessing the landscape, never resting until they were through the door. He and Greg stomped their snow-covered boots on the hook rug welcome mat, like men who'd gone through extensive feminine house training. Bean reached me first and winked before standing aside for Greg, who dug deep into his jingly pocket and pulled out a key. Marshall McCrae cleared everything up, didn't he, sweetheart? Greg addressed this to Bean, who smiled big and bright and nodded, still angelic, innocent. Yes, sir, Daddy always takes care of things. I made a show of rubbing my wrists for Greg's benefit and scowled at him for mine. So I'm free to go? Greg scowled back. No, I'm transferring you into the marshal's custody, but there's no charges. Seems this guy was Greg made a slashing motion across his neck, out of Bean's view. Taken out by his partner. You probably heard about him on the news, the escaped convict, that Harris man, the one what escaped from up at the maximum security on Hillview. Anyway, yeah, I guess she's a witness, huh, Marshall? Greg finished, handing me off to Daddy Bean, a.k.a. Marshall McCrae. The good Marshall faced me with the same unblinking intensity that Bean had. I have the statement you gave the officer here. You're free to go, but don't leave town. It sounded cliché, and I couldn't tell if he meant it as a joke or not. His handsome face was inscrutable. I decided it was a joke. I mean, where would I go from Eden? My trip into town for groceries hadn't ended so well I wanted to try it out again anytime soon, in weather fair or foul. Greg seemed to take the command literally, silently offering the marshal his cuffs, but Daddy Bean raised his dark eyebrows and his voice had steel in it when he pinned Greg with a scowl of his own. That won't be necessary. She's done here. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't stop the shiver that overtook me, nor could I stop Daddy Bean from draping his windbreaker around my shoulders. His scowl had changed to concern. You've had a rough night, ma'am. I'd offer you a ride home, but... Oh no, but thank you, my ride shouldn't be too far away, right, Greg? Greg shook himself out of the hold of Daddy Bean's threat and finally looked my way. What? I repeated myself and got confirmation that Chad indeed was on his way with a police escort. Daddy Bean seemed satisfied. I'll be in touch, ma'am. Sorry you got caught up in this. I nodded, hope creeping back into my limbs and my mind as I started to believe that the nightmare might actually be over. Thank you. I smelled chocolate before I felt Bean beside me. She slipped a hand into mine. Thank you, Miss Vada. It was fun. Daddy, can I have some candy now, please? Daddy Bean turned to Greg. I'll leave money on the counter. You get on the wire. Tell your men we're looking for an armed and dangerous man who has killed many times before and won't think twice about shooting an officer. He glanced down at his daughter, who was still holding my hand and looking longingly at the checkered cloth baskets, or any innocent for that matter. That insinuation hung in the air like skunk stink. We all tasted the ugly of what he'd just said, had it seep into our skin with a foulness that wouldn't soon wash. I squeezed Bean's hand. She smiled up at me, a non-crazy smile, and then, with a nod from her dad, let go and skipped over to the candy. I swallowed hard. Is everything... Daddy Bean nodded, but I noticed his hands fisted into whiteness that rivaled the snow I'd almost died in, outing the dusty freckles that were sprinkled across his knuckles in DNA confetti. She wasn't hurt, but she could have been. So, trust me when I say, I won't rest until I get my man. Greg cleared his throat. Sir, I think we can help with that. Daddy Bean looked like he wasn't sure that was possible, but then Greg played his ace. We have a sighting of your man. On foot up Green Holler ETA 10 minutes from here. Greg shifted foot to foot and put his hands on his utility belt, one resting on his gun like Barney Fife, ready to fire his one bullet in service to Daddy Bean's quest for his man. Where do you want us, Marshal? You stay here. Block the road. To me, he gave a curt nod. Go home. Lock your doors. Enjoy your Valentine's Day. I thought that was the end of it. I'd been dismissed as summarily as Greg had been. But then Daddy Bean's gaze flicked from me to his daughter, happily collecting candy up and down the aisles and back to me. We'll be seeing you. Chapter 6. The snow hadn't let up in the 3 days since Valentine's Day. Neither had my nightmares. The man Marshall Daddy Bean was hunting down was still at large, according to the local Eden News, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow on this creep's radar. Had he been watching me in that parking lot? I didn't know if he'd seen me drive away with his murdered partner, or if he blamed me for ruining his plans. But the fear that he'd come for me lingered like the persistent snow now turning gray and hard in the drifts. I glanced at my sweet, chiseled Chad who hadn't left my side at home or at work, coming into town with me and staying all day in the diner working on some project he hadn't shared. Then I let my gaze linger on the blue windbreaker hanging on the back of Gran's rocker. I hadn't sat there since I'd been chained to the one down at the general store, but I'd walked by, thinking of the surreal Valentine's Day and sometimes bending to get that waft of chocolate and Old Spice. It reminded me that I had in fact survived the craziest day of my life, or probably anyone's life within a 1,000-mile radius, north, south, west, or east of Eden. As predicted, my life at the diner had become almost unbearable. But my boss, Mrs. Pete, diner owner and part-time miniature horse breeder, was loving the steady stream of looky-louse who'd even choke down her nasty pancakes when she manned the grill just to get a glimpse of me, which was most days now that she needed me up front to draw in customers. The news hadn't given out any information to connect me to the insane ordeal, but word had gotten around. Nothing happened in Eden without at least 10 nosy old biddies knowing about it and sparking up the gossip mill call trees until the whole town was flooded with 50 different rumors of the same situation. I'd finally snapped at work last night, and Mrs. Pete had given me the day off today to get it together before her President's Day pancake breakfast tomorrow. Didn't need me exchanging words with paying customers again. At least not until I'd simmered down from hard boil to the warming zone. She'd spread the word far and near that I'd be there on Pancake Day. Only, I wasn't sure I should be. Not with that killer on the loose. I bit my thumbnail, or what was left of it, down to the quick and glanced out the tiny crescent window on the cabin's front door at the still pouring snow. Should I call in? Say it's too slick? Chad looked up from his papers, the ones he'd been immersed in more than his latest video game. What's that, love? Should I call in? Tomorrow, I mean. I have a good excuse. I gestured to the steady snowfall made beautiful and glimmering in the porch lights. What if he's... Chad joined me by the rocking chair near the front door. Shh. Come here, babe. Yes, you should call in. In fact, he pulled me away from the rocking chair towards the bed where he had his papers spread out. You should quit. I sighed. He'd said that before. That he had enough money for us to live on, that I didn't need to work 2 jobs, especially at the diner. He hated that I smelled of pancakes and syrup, and burgers and fries. He didn't so much mind me smelling of old books. In fact, that he found enticing. But the library didn't pay enough to cover my coffee habit. Surely he understood I couldn't rely on him forever. Before I could say that I had to work for a living, he countered with, "This time, I mean it. Forever." I shivered. What do you mean forever? First, I'm not just living on my trust fund. No, I'm not. The games I made, this, he gestured wide at the papers on top of Gran's old green and white Irish wedding chain quilt, they finally paid off. I'm a self-made man now. For the second time in 1 week, tears came to knock in prickly fists behind my eyes. I let them in, opened the door wide, and cried. Chad looked bewildered, and I felt as confused as he looked. I didn't know why I was crying, only that something in me had broken out. Chad pointed to his papers again. I wanted to tell you on Valentine's Day, but Valentine's Day. Here, I had wanted to give you something then, but now's better. Before Chad could move to whatever that something was, a sweep of headlights flickered across the wall of Gran's cabin, and a horn broke the tension of the moment with its blaring brass of announcement. Someone was in the driveway. My heart climbed up my throat like it was wearing spurs and out to set a rodeo record. It's him. Chad pulled me tight, simultaneously shutting off the light and soothing me with his logic. I doubt the killer would just announce himself like that. His words were bold, but I noticed he picked up Gran's trusty old shotgun and shoved me to the side as he peered out into the snowy, porch-lit night. Despite the fear sliding down my back like room-temperature jello, I had to look. I hooked a finger on Gran's homemade curtains, cheerful yellow and white polyester daisies blocking out the winter blues, and saw 2 redheads and the twin to my car in the floodlights. Without a word, I let the daisies fall from my fingers and grabbed the navy windbreaker off the rocker. "Where are you going?" Chad stood stone still by the window. "Vada? Vada? It's okay. It's the marshal. I'll be right back." I closed the door behind me, shivering on the porch until Bean's voice shattered the snow-cushioned silence. "Miss Vada!" That set my feet free, and I hurried down with the crinkling coat clutched close to my chest. I stopped a few feet from the passenger side where Bean stood waving. I couldn't find my voice to ask, but Daddy Bean seemed to hear my unspoken question as I held out his jacket. He lifted his chin in Bean's direction, and she nodded back before smiling at me and came closer, holding out a familiar white paper bag and bobbing her face towards it for me to look inside. "We got you something." I took the bag and unfolded the neatly closed top. Lemon drops. My heart did a funny little dip and the warm fuzzies countered the cold night. "Thank you, Bean. That's very nice," she hummed and added, "and..." Another look passed between father and daughter, and Bean put a hand to the side of her mouth and did her mock whisper bit at me. "We got him." My voice stumbled over a fissure of fear. "Who?" "The bad man. The one who got away." My legs threatened to buckle, and Daddy Bean grabbed for my elbow, holding me up and once again putting his jacket around my shoulders instead of taking it back. "You're cold." I smiled at Daddy Bean, chattering out my words through the sudden shivers gripping me. You caught him. Thank goodness. Did you turn him over to Greg, Officer Walker, or is he yours?" Daddy Bean shrugged at the same time as Bean shook her head and pointed to the back door of the SUV. I glanced over, fear thickening my tongue as I braced myself to meet the eyes of a cold-blooded killer. The snow that had clumped up on the window and obscured the view. But I couldn't look away now. I cupped a hand over my eyes and peered closer at the back window just as the snow slid down, glittering in the floodlights. For a moment, the pristine snow looked pink. Then I saw him, the man slumped against the window. Eyes bruised, no, smudged. Twin fingertip blurs of brown on the eyelids, and above them, dead center, 2 holes. Beside me, Bean slipped a sticky hand into mine and smiled her chocolate-toothed smile. "Daddy's teaching me." The end. If you enjoyed this story, you might like Murder Most Llama Paisley Morgan series, the Mia Watson cruise ship cozies. And if you did enjoy this story, kindly leave a review. I'd be most grateful. :